Baby, baby.
Good afternoon, listeners. It is November 5th, 2020. I am recording this at 2:50 p.m. is the current time. As of right now, you probably know about what's going on in the world, so I want to go over a few things in regards to the biggest events in the world. Presidential election, a little bit of my personal experience on election day, and some thoughts going forward about what we can do to better understand each other. So the first thing I want to talk about is, if you're listening to this, as I'm recording this, the presidential race still has not been called. I am currently examining the Chicago Tribune website, which is also going off of the AP standard in terms of races being called. So right now, as it currently stands, the presidential race, Joe Biden has apparently 264 electoral votes. President Trump has 214. The race is too close to call in Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Also Alaska for some reason, but whatever. We are currently waiting on results in each state, and depending on which way the numbers go, it appears that Joe Biden is about 6 votes away from becoming the next president of the United States. 6 electoral votes, that is, which would coincide nicely with Nevada, where Joe Biden is currently up by about a percentage point. So, as of right now in Nevada, which is taking its sweet time, and if you've seen the memes online, you know what I'm talking about, Joe Biden is currently winning with 604,251 votes, which is 49.43%. Donald Trump currently has 592,813, which is 48.5%, and other candidates have other numbers. But big thing here is that Joe Biden has a lead and continues to hold it, and when it comes through, people are predicting that Nevada will in fact be the state that puts Joe Biden over the mark. But there's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on here. So before I get into that, though, and we go more into detail about, what's going on with the presidential election and what the specific breakdown looks like, what I want to briefly go over is my personal experience I had on election day. Because this election day, as I mentioned earlier, I was an election judge, and more specifically, I was a polling place technician, a PPT. So essentially what that means is that I was the person in charge of the machine where there were touchscreens for people to cast ballots and scanning ballots into the machine. That was my primary job, although I did help with things like checking voters in and covering for other people when they weren't there. But primarily I was stationed by this machine, and my job was to help voters get their machines into the counting machine and guide them through the process of using the touchscreens that they use for voting. And I must say, these machines that the Cook County government acquired are very nice, well put together. Comes with touchscreens and printers and power sources and the ability to transmit the votes. It was highly secure. The judges I worked with were super professional and nice. We had 2 precincts in this elementary school gymnasium. People were very kind. We were able to help each other out. It was a long day, though. I had spent about an hour or two the previous night helping to set up, and then I got back in at 5 a.m. on Tuesday and was there until about 8:30. At which point I was trusted to take the actual ballots and most of the important information that was on memory cards and other keys and things like that, all the stuff that was essential to the voting system after it had been locked down, and I took it back to the center where the receiving station, as it's called, where they would then collect everything and then later process it. So overall, it was a really great experience. I would highly encourage everybody to do it because it does give you a sense of the actual mechanics of voting and how it works. And I saw people of all walks of life, first-time voters, newly registered immigrants, people who had been voting for years. Some people I knew, a lot of people I'd never seen before. I wasn't in my home precinct where I would have voted. I was assigned to a nearby one, but, you know, I still saw some people that I knew. But, you know, I was able to see a father come in with his daughters, and then when he taught them the importance of voting, and when they were done, they high-fived each other. Several people who are recent immigrants voted in their first presidential election and very excited to do so. Tons of young people who were excited and were able to register for the first time. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see all these people excited about casting a ballot. Not just for president. You know, we had a Senate race, a congressional race, House and Senate districts at the state level, numerous judges, county commissioners, different officials, and of course the big ballot initiative as to whether or not to change Illinois from a constitutionally mandated flat tax to a graduated income tax. Overall, it was a pretty slow day. Had about maybe 100 or so ballots cast throughout the day. So over the course of a 14-hour day, you had spurts of people, and then it was quiet. We had poll watchers come in and then leave because they were bored, because obviously there was nothing to do most of the day. Also, you can be a poll watcher. Really doesn't require any effort on your part. Most of the time, your local county officials or other county partisan officials will give you some credentials to go to a polling place. You know, you can just look. It's all transparent. We all have these giant manuals about how the machines work and how the vote counting works, and you can be there to observe it for yourself to make sure everything is going well. So you get paid. It's definitely worth it. And I was able to see some of the best parts of America when I was there. You know, I will say the immigrants that had come in and said that they had just immigrated within the last maybe year or a few years or so and had become citizens, I should say, and they were casting their ballot for the first time. You could see the excitement and the pride on their face, even with a mask covering it, because this may be the first time that they'd ever been able to have a vote that actually mattered, that was a legitimate vote for something that they truly believed in. And you know, it's very hard to see that and not feel inspired about people, and it's very hard to not feel inspired about people are invested in the process and want to see it through, and they haven't given in to cynicism, and they're able to go out and cast their ballots knowing that when it goes into that machine and later it's taken back, that it will count and that it mattered. So as I had mentioned earlier, right now neither person has been identified as the clear winner, though Joe Biden is currently in the lead in both the popular vote and the electoral vote, and he is currently in the lead in both Nevada and Arizona. President Trump is currently ahead in Pennsylvania and Georgia, though the large parts of the state where the Democratic vote that is likely to favor Joe Biden are the last to be counted in terms of the absentee ballots and mail-in votes. And as the results have updated, every time they have, both in Georgia and in Pennsylvania, President Trump's lead is decreasing. Now, I will say when I got home and I was watching the election results, I will say that when I saw it, I thought it was odd. I thought that there was this weird kind of, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to turn out type of deal. Now, as I may have mentioned before, if not, you may have heard it somewhere else, that there was this issue that there was going to be something called a red mirage, where that President Trump would capture the majority of the in-person vote on election day, so that it looks like when those votes are counted first that the president is winning, but that Vice President Biden would be able to capitalize on the mail-in votes and the absentee votes, and as those votes would process, they would slowly turn up, and those states would in fact either become very competitive or would go Joe Biden's way. So in fact, what we were seeing was the president had a substantial lead in many of these states as the evening started. So right around when the first polls closed around about 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then later 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then again for Pacific Standard Time, we started to see this influx of in-person day votes that significantly favored Donald Trump. And while I mentioned earlier that when I was watching these numbers come up, I felt a little odd because something didn't seem like quite right in terms of the results, other people were, how can I put this nicely, losing their minds. Many of my friends and family, who are also not fans of the president and also progressive and Democrats, saw what was happening and literally went right back into 2016 mode. Like, the chaos was there, the anger, the resentment that this was happening and that there wasn't this giant wave, because many people had said that we would probably know on election night who the president was going to be, based on the polling averages that had come out showing Biden ahead in many swing states and having a double-digit lead in the national polls. Now, full disclosure, in my pre-election rant episode, I made a prediction and I shared it on Twitter about my electoral vote projections, and I can safely say that they were off. Not all of them, but some of the bigger things that I missed were Florida did not swing towards Joe Biden, and it would appear that North Carolina isn't either. However, Wisconsin and Michigan at this point have both been called for Biden. Arizona, which I also said would go for Biden, is currently trending in that direction, although we still don't have all the votes, but it would appear that if Joe Biden leads hold, he will have flipped Arizona. And Arizona as well elected its second Democratic senator. So the state that had Barry Goldwater and John McCain might be a key instrument in getting Joe Biden elected. So there's a bit of a historical shift there. So I'm willing to admit my projection was off. Now, I still believe that Joe Biden is going to be the next president, and based on the current vote totals and the lead totals in Arizona and Nevada, and the shrinking rate of the president's lead in Pennsylvania and Georgia, it is very likely that Joe Biden will win at least two out of 4 states, if not 3 out of 4, and all of these will put him over. Because again, as I mentioned before, currently projected at 264 votes. Not everybody is saying that. A lot of news organizations are skeptical, but Fox News, the AP, and the Chicago Tribune, the ones that I'm going off of here, have Joe Biden at 264. So he's already surpassed Hillary Clinton. It seems like we're just waiting on the process to finish up, and very likely that Joe Biden will win, pending some massive change in the voter atmosphere in Arizona, and the vote totals end up with him winning in Pennsylvania and Georgia. We may know sometime today, we may know sometime tomorrow, Friday or Saturday, but it does appear that once all these ballots are processed, that Joe Biden is going to, these are the projections that I'm reading based on those who are trying their statistical models and having them hold up with the current vote totals, is that if Joe Biden continues to win in Georgia and Pennsylvania at the rate he is, and it looks like these mail and absentee ballots are going anywhere between 75-25 Joe Biden's way to 80-20 Joe Biden's way, that Trump's lead is being erased and that it will likely be surpassed. So if he wins Pennsylvania, that's the ball game. If he wins Georgia, that's also the ball game. Georgia is a state that I did not predict that Joe Biden would win, but it would appear that he has. So when I said that I had this weird feeling about what was going on, I think it was that while we had been anticipating this massive blue wave to take over all these states, it wasn't everywhere the blue wave was successful. It definitely looks like in Florida that the president made significant gains in the Hispanic community, and that helped him win the state of Florida by a larger margin than he did in 2016. Many on the left are upset about that, but that might be a story for another day. And I'm sure there's going to be, when this is over, there's going to be a ton of research into why Trump was able to win Florida, despite the fact that they thought that this would be the state that would help cinch it for Joe Biden. Georgia, on the other hand, is going to be another case study in how places like Atlanta are starting to change what was once a pretty solid conservative Republican state into a competitive battleground that will very likely end up being the linchpin in Joe Biden's electoral college coalition. Now again, it is possible that Trump will somehow get a higher percentage of the ballots and be able to hold on to his lead in both Pennsylvania and Georgia. And it's also entirely possible that Arizona or Nevada will flip in the other direction based on the vote counts. It's not very probable at this point, but it's still possible, so we don't want to rule that out. And the president is acting like he's already won and it's being taken from him. If you did stay up late enough on election night hoping to find some sort of resolution, you would have seen that both Joe Biden and President Trump gave a speech about the current state of the race. And Joe Biden came out and said that they're projected to win and we believe that the numbers will be on our side, but we're not going to know tonight, and we knew that we weren't going to know that night. But we're confident in victory. And Trump declared victory, essentially, and said that if he loses, it's because he's been robbed, because they're finding votes everywhere to have him lose. Now, we've heard this line before. He's essentially said that he won the popular vote in 2016, but illegal votes were the only thing that cost him to lose it. And he said if he were to lose this race, it would only be because of shenanigans done by Democrats in swing states. What I will say is that based on all available reporting, and even with my own personal experience in the polling precinct, is that everyone involved so far has done their jobs professionally, competently, and without bias, that a lot of steps were taken to try to help people vote and to have all those things done accordingly. And it would appear that the biggest issue is that the number of votes is so large, and that most of them are being done by mail and absentee. That is the primary reason for the drag. There's no issue of malfeasance, but it is taking longer than many people probably hoped. You know, we should be thrilled about the vote totals, because based on the current raw votes that we have available, it would appear that this is one of the highest turnout elections ever. And right now, I'm looking at the Washington Post, a graphic about what the current election turnout is. As of right now, again, this is now 3/20, November 5th, 2020. As a percentage of the voting eligible population, it looks like we're so far at 60.5% in terms of turnout, which is incredible. It's higher than it is in 2016. It looks like it's going to surpass 2008, which was 61.6%, and it may even surpass 1908, which was the big high of 65.7%. Currently, the projection is that there will be about 66.3% turnout. So that's massive. That is a huge increase in the amount of people voting. And if these raw vote totals hold, it would appear that Joe Biden will win with the most raw votes of any president ever, surpassing Barack Obama's record in 2008. And it's also entirely possible that Donald Trump may get the second highest number of votes ever for a presidential candidate, or for a sitting president, for that matter. The turnout is off the charts. And you gotta say that that's great, right? That means that a lot of people who may have been disenfranchised over the last few election cycles said, this matters. This matters immensely. And I know we said that about every election, but they knew that 2020 was different. And they knew that 2020 was going to be key to their personal lives. And they made the decision to vote, to get their friends and family to vote, and to be part of the process, which is great. And I will say, on a personal note, I was supposed to be a judge in early voting, but they had such a huge number of applicants that they didn't need me for that. So a lot of people interested in being part of the process, and that is something that we should all be able to celebrate. We can celebrate the most votes for president and the most votes for a sitting president ever in the same election. And we can envy the fact that when it's all said and done, it's very likely this will be the election with the highest turnout in recorded American history. And you know what? For everybody who shared the message about voting, for all the voting campaigns that were out there, and frankly for all the partisanship that encouraged it, and with the pandemic, I guess it is an epidemic if you can think of it that way, but the pandemic has caused us to change the way we vote, and it looks like a lot of us were able to participate in mail-in or early voting or absentee voting, and it clearly worked to help boost turnout, which we can always be happy with higher vote turnout because that means more people participated in the process. And the more people participate in the process, the more legitimacy the process has. For all the complaints that we have, this election has restored and renewed my faith in America more so than I think it was before in 2016. And look, I'm not just saying that because Joe Biden won and that's the person I voted for. I want to make it very clear that Donald Trump surpassed all expectations, which means that A, something is wrong with the polling industry, and it's definitely undercounting the support that the president has. And B, this has also helped lead to several other effects, including here in Illinois, where the unfair tax proposal, the constitutional amendment to change Illinois from a flat tax to a graduated tax, not only didn't reach the 60% that it needed to win, or the 50% of all people voting on it, it lost the popular vote. 55% of people voted against the amendment. Fantastic. Fantastic to tell J.B. Pritzker and Mike Madigan to shove it, using the ballot process. You know, I was very worried that because of the massive surge in voter turnout and Illinois being a predominantly Democratic state that we would have Madigan having more power and we would have the graduated income tax at our peril. But turns out we didn't get either. Turns out Republicans were able to defend seats and actually flip a couple. Turns out that Mike Madigan throwing as much money as possible in the airtime and demonizing every single Republican running for office as people who hate women and want to ruin their lives didn't listen and voted for people that they believe would help be a better force in state government. So much so that Senator Dick Durbin, who won his race, but you know, that wasn't unexpected, he said that Madigan is a problem and a drag on the Democratic Party, after we've had several people challenge him. So, while I think he's still confident in his ability to keep control of the party, the voters have given a clear message that they're not going to take this anymore. That this graduated income tax, the justices that on the Illinois Supreme Court you think are going to rule for you, other cronies that you want to install in the Illinois House to do your bidding, we're not going to stand for it. The people of Illinois demand accountability, and this government, this state house government, is run by a corrupt man who does not deserve to be there. And the Democratic Party in this state, and every single person who's cheering because they think Joe Biden is going to win, which again is the most likely outcome at this point, but not entirely improbable that Trump could win. But they have to answer, if they're so happy that Trump is out of the White House, why aren't they thrilled the fact that this man that controls all of their candidates is one of the most corrupt men in the entire nation? But you know what? That's a podcast for another day. What I do want to get into is the public reaction we've had so far to the election. And, you know, when I said I had this weird gut feeling earlier, eventually the polls have restored my confidence, and the current turnout is making sense and ideally will play out in the way that we believe it will. But, you know, when this is all said and done, I'm seeing two different reactions from those who I would say are in the very pro-Trump camp and those who are in the very anti-Trump camp. So let's start with the pro-Trump camp. People that I've been talking to, people that, since I'm still currently at this point a Republican, but we'll see about that in the future. But the people I'm talking to now who are Trump fans, I will say there are those Trump supporters who truly did believe he was going to win, either by a landslide or at least by the same margin he did in 2016, or if not slightly better. There were those who were projecting the era of confidence of Trump winning, but I think knew deep down that the numbers were troubling for him. And then there were people like me who were very pessimistic and said the numbers don't look good, the president's path to winning don't seem very viable, we're looking at possibly massive losses here. And I'll admit in retrospect that that sounds more pessimistic than it needed to be. Because if you go to the Cook Political Report National Popular Vote Tracker, it shows you the current 2020 results, the swing versus 2016, and the raw votes cast in 2016. So it turns out in Illinois, and I'll go over the swing states in a second here, but just to give you an example of why I think Illinois was able to fight off the progressive income tax and many of Madigan's other cronies, is that in terms of the raw votes cast, Illinois actually appears to be down about 5.1%. So our turnout wasn't as high as it was back in 2016. However, in terms of the partisan breakdown, it looks like Republicans actually had higher turnout, about 4.9% as opposed to 2016. So there were less voters overall, but the turnout was increased among Republicans. Now, for national purposes, it would appear that in the swing states, Democratic turnout is up 5.9%. In Georgia, it's up 4.9%. In Pennsylvania, the Republican turnout is up very slightly, 0.08%. And in Nevada, it's also up 2.2% versus 2016. So if you're reading those numbers, you're probably thinking to yourself, uh-oh, it sounds like Nevada and Pennsylvania might go the other direction. And again, at this point, seems like all things are possible. But it could just mean that Republicans turned out in greater numbers than before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the numbers to win. And I can also just point out that the turnout for Democrats increased in both North and South Carolina, but they have been less successful in winning there. So increased vote turnout by partisan doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win, but it can affect the overall structure of who's going to succeed and who doesn't. But for me on the pro-Trump side, a lot of them are taking the president's word that he actually won and that the results coming in are fraudulent. And you see this with the cringe-worthy video of his supporters going to voting centers in Philadelphia and Detroit and Maricopa County yelling either count the vote or stop the vote depending on the state they're in, because in the states where he is losing and the vote total is going against them, they want to stop counting the votes, and in the states where he might be gaining, they want to continue counting the votes. So it's very clearly a naked power play into trying to stop the hemorrhaging, but nobody's buying it. And even while the president was on talking about what he thought to be true, news networks would just break in and just start talking over him and said none of this is true. He hasn't won anything. Nobody's called it. There's a lot of votes left to be counted. We have to wait the process out. You know what? And I know this because people told me, but I'm pretty for sure that on election night, a lot of people who were pro-Trump went to sleep and stayed up thinking that, yes, this is 2016 all over again. They were wrong. We knew it. We knew if we stuck by our guy, we would go through. The president had all these rallies. He threw all this fear out. They spent every single last cent they had left into advertising and reaching out into minority communities to try to attract more Hispanic and African American men to help eat into Joe Biden's vote totals. And it looked like it was paying off. They thought, this is it. We're going to defy reality again. We're going to win the White House. We're going to have unchecked power, and we're going to be able to finish what we started. then over the night, it looks like those leads evaporated and shrunk, and the president is now claiming that he is about to lose by fraudulent means, and his supporters are outside trying to stop the votes from being counted. So what we're seeing from the Trump camp is a lot of messaging about how they're still going to win, or that if they lose, it's because ballots are being found illegitimately. Also, frivolous court motions trying to stop certain ballots from being counted that they believe that are going to be against the president in large numbers, whether those be absentee ballots, same-day registration, those postmarked election day, just places that they know are going to be against him and don't want to count at all, which is obviously legal flailing at this point, just trying to delay and stall and hope for some sort of miracle. And as the president said, he would take it to the Supreme Court, even though it would appear that that doesn't seem to be necessary because everything's going to play out in a normal way without any major disputes. So what we're seeing from the pro-Trump crowd is anger. They're mad at people like me because I voted for Joe Biden, and they're mad at other Republicans who split their tickets. And you can see this, that the president is underperforming Republicans in certain areas, meaning that people like me didn't vote for Trump at the top of the ticket but voted for Republicans elsewhere, and those Republicans managed to be successful, but the president lost enough votes in certain swing states to likely lose this election. They're also mad at the Libertarians for voting for their candidate, even though it's small, but again, these numbers matter, and as 2016 is a friendly reminder, it was all our fault when Donald Trump got elected if you voted for a third party. And now the Trump supporters are going to be super mad at the third party people for quote-unquote costing them the election. Which again, that's what happens when you vote third party, right? You vote third party likely knowing they're not going to win, and that the other side is going to blame you for them not being able to attract enough voters. Political 101. So while many Trump supporters are happy that the president has exceeded expectations in terms of his own voter performance, they're upset because they believe, wrongfully in my opinion, that the election is being stolen from them, and not so much on clearly there were enough votes for Republicans elsewhere to, in what would appear to be in this case, either protect the Senate or at least minimize most of the losses, but not to protect the president, so that the president himself is responsible for him not winning the election. It's not the people who didn't turn out, because very clearly the turnout numbers are the highest ever. And again, it is entirely possible that President Trump will get A, the most votes for a sitting president ever, B, the most votes for a Republican president ever, and C, the second most votes of any person to ever run for president ever, means that we have to accept that there is a real force in this country that, for numerous different reasons and different interests, picked Donald Trump over Joe Biden. And for many of these conservative Republicans, Donald Trump was their champion, the person they believed would fight for them against the media and against the coastal cities and against people that they thought were out to get them. Now, I don't personally subscribe to that theory. I personally think the president is shallow and a bit of a con artist and a grifter and a showman, but he was able to get people to vote for him, and he definitely made people feel important and powerful, and he was able to use that despite what every poll in the world and all the available evidence told us this entire election was able to generate a significant amount of support. Again, apparently, if the numbers hold, not enough to win a second term, and will in fact lose some of the states he won the first time, but a massive increase from 2016, and many different states that the Democrats had thought would be ripe opportunities for pickup, turns out they were not prepared for it. Okay, now here is what I think is the craziest part of all of this scenario, and just to be honest, if we're thinking about 2020, is it really a shock that the election was going to drag out for several days afterwards? It wouldn't be 2020 if it was a nice clear-cut answer one way or the other. It's the most 2020 thing for it to be dragged out and slow and causing anxiety just like everything else this year has. So, part of the course, probably should have seen that coming, but I digress. The weirdest issue that I've seen here is that Joe Biden is on the cusp of victory. Joe Biden is on track to win a significant electoral college victory, and as I mentioned before, the most amount of votes for any president ever, and is going to defeat a sitting incumbent president, a feat that is very rarely achieved. And many on the left and the progressive side, it's like they're not even happy. They're angry that so many people voted for Trump in the first place. And I've seen this a lot of places, is that many people are upset because Trumpism wasn't repudiated. Because they didn't get the blowout that they thought they were going to get, or were hoping that they were going to get, and that the polling data available told them that they were going to get. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't win, because it would appear that based on the numbers, they did in fact win. And you would think that defeating Trump would be good enough. But it seems like a lot of them got the idea that they would be able to take the Senate, that they would increase their majority in the House, that they would take over state governments, and that when this administration came in, they would have this bold, progressive, FDR-style revolution to fundamentally change the country, which was, again, a fear that many people had that put them in Trump's camp in the first place. And look, Arizona and Colorado have both flipped from Republican to Democrat, which, again, many people expected, but those are still positives. Doug Jones lost in Alabama, but again, a Republican won in Alabama, so I feel like we shouldn't be shocked about that, and more so just see it as a natural correction to Doug Jones' surprising win over the child molester Roy Moore. Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham both won their races, which when we think about it shouldn't be a shocker, because it's Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell who are in Kentucky and South Carolina, respectively. Still very conservative states, still very much in the Trump camp, and despite the amount of money that was thrown at those two challengers, which could have probably been spent better in, I don't know, Florida or Pennsylvania or North Carolina, they put in South Carolina and Kentucky thinking that they would get ahead of their skis and somehow come out ahead. I just want to take a minute here, and I want to talk to my liberal progressive friends and listeners and fan members out there who they seem pretty hung up on the fact that the current sitting president received roughly 48% of the popular vote, and who are talking about America as this violent, angry place where people can't visit, or in some cases can't drive through, like you need a new green book to drive through them, or hoping that not hoping, but saying if Florida and Texas get hit by hurricanes that they're not going to lift a finger to help. Like, these same people talk about civility and decency, and yet this is the stuff they pull for having people vote differently and not winning, but whatever, right? I'm not going to get hung up on that. Across the country, 6 states voted to legalize cannabis, 2 of them for medical and 4 of them recreationally. DC voted to decriminalize psychedelic mushroom. Oregon voted to legalize psychedelic mushrooms and decriminalize all drugs, like Portugal-style decriminalization, which is in my mind, a great public health initiative that they're doing. I should also mention that the House of Representatives is still likely to be in Democratic control, and that while Republicans did pick up seats, many of the new Republican members are women, so the amount of women in Congress has increased from the 2018 midterms. So, it seems like there's something else I'm missing here, and I can't think of it. Oh, yes. Oh, that's right. They beat Donald Trump. As in, the current sitting president who not that long ago appeared to be on a very reliable path to re-election, has, for all practical purposes, been defeated by who everyone tells us is a decent, kind, responsible, competent adult, which is what it sounds like they wanted, and what it sounds like a coalition of Democratic Party regulars, progressives, and Republicans and conservatives who soured on the president, enough of a coalition in just enough states to get that to pull off. And yet, they didn't win Texas, they didn't win Florida. More African American and Hispanic, non-college educated men have gone into the Republican camp and are big supporters of the president. The president hasn't necessarily lost his edge with seniors, and the support for Trump is stronger than they anticipated. And instead of taking this as, maybe there is something about either what the president is offering or what the people want, and using the president as a vessel to get it, as an opportunity to come to greater understanding, even though they're on the precipice of winning and taking control of the government, the executive branch of the government, they are acting like they've lost because Trump didn't receive this massive blowout repudiation. As if everything that ended up with Trump support is a direct result of the president's personal characteristics or personal policy positions. Right? This has nothing to do with the serious deliberations of court packing that were being discussed in the event that they took control of the Senate. It wasn't the deliberations of this radical transformation and vengeance upon people who support Trump that may have driven it to him. It wasn't even the ill-advised defund police movement and the woke crowd demanding total submission or rejection resulted in minorities turning against them and supporting the current presidential administration. People of color and women who came out to support the president, instead of trying to ask why maybe they didn't get their support, they call them selfish, they call them victimizers, they say that they are on the side of their oppressors and will always be on the side of their oppressors, as if this is like some 1850 we still believe race science is real and this is the only determining factor into how we should support politically. Like, are you people insane? You're on the cusp of defeating the sitting president, whom all of you have had massive disdain for since the beginning. And let's be clear, a lot of you never wanted him to be there in the first place, never really accepted the fact that he was legitimately elected, never accepted the fact that people supported him for reasons other than being racist and sexist and monsters, and have spent nothing but the last few years telling us how wrong we are, how we've all been part of the problem, and if we had just listened to you, all of this would have been avoided, only to have your progressive candidates lose in the Democratic primary to Joe Biden, then to rally around Joe Biden and act like you guys weren't fans of him in the first place, then to belittle all of the president's supporters and to overcast them and to go over them like they don't matter, and then to find out that 48% of the country doesn't agree with you and you call them the problem. Like, you spend the whole time talking about how Donald Trump doesn't add to his coalition, but guess what? He did, and it wasn't because he actively sought their support, right? People were drawn to him because of people like you on the left who talk about this woke nonsense that people are not fans of. You talk about abolishing their police departments. You talk about rioting is peaceful, that looting is reparations, and that, we can ignore all the standards too, because our first problem with Trump was that he has nothing but double standards. But then we realized we could ignore all standards too, because we're the quote-unquote majority. We're able to decide what we actually want, and Trump wasn't legitimately elected in the first place. The Senate isn't legitimate. The Supreme Court isn't legitimate. We're just going to say whatever the hell we feel like. I can't believe I have to say this to people, because I thought maybe by nominating Joe Biden they realized it, but perhaps they just never are able to realize it, is that if you insult and belittle people and you classify them solely based on their race and gender, you're not going to win political allies and friends. That's not how people work. These people think in their intellectual bubbles that if only the rest of the world listened to them, that all problems would be solved, that they could ignore their own double standards, that they could ignore evidence that goes against their worldview, and then not only demand that we accept it, but label us as the worst possible things because we disagree with them politically, or because they support the current lawfully elected president of the United States, who in our binary system, which they all like to remind us is one of two only real options. What is wrong with you people? You're on the cusp of winning and getting back executive control of the government, and yet you act like you're always the victim and always losing. You know, I said earlier I thought that Trump had made the left great again. I thought that he had animated them beyond belief, and it seems very clear he has. But he's also gotten in their heads is that if anybody supports him, that the primary instinct isn't to understand why, it is to demean them, it is to call them monsters and selfish, it is to call them racist and bigots, it is to not understand what we can do to appeal to them, but we must demonize them for their choice. And you know what? I've got my problems with Trump. I made that very clear. I didn't vote for Trump the first time or the second time. But I know people who vote for Trump. They're my friends. They're my family. They're coworkers. They're good people who have different reasons that I happen to disagree with. And the idea that people are posting about no matter what happens, we're all in this together, and they're being attacked because they're talking about some sort of victimization because you're privileged and this election might determine whether or not you live or die. Don't give me that hyperbolic bullshit, right? Don't give me that crap. Just say you want power and you don't want the other people to have it. Don't give me this fake caring, I'm out there looking for people and look at my privilege and I admit it. Shut up. You don't care. You don't really want to understand. They don't want to understand why young black men and young Hispanic men support Trump. Instead of understanding why people that they just assume are going to support them don't, they label them as not even parts of their own groups. What do you people not get? Take the hint. There's a reason Joe Biden appears to have won with the most votes of any president in history. There's a reason he won the Democratic primary, and there's a reason he won a reasonable share of conservative Republicans whose support was instrumental in him obtaining victory. I will say this, I'm not really sure what happens to the Republican Party pending a Donald Trump loss. I'm not sure if he hangs around forever and then becomes the kingmaker, if he runs for office again, if his family attempts to change it, if there's a splinter movement or civil war, or something happens, but it's going to have to change if it wants to survive, because it's not winning the popular vote. And if the popular vote is enough every time in the states that matter, they will not be able to win the presidency. I'm not sure if the Republican Party in the future becomes a specific vehicle for delivering the conservative center-right values that help propel this country forward, but there's going to have to be some sort of force that recognizes that. The same force that helped Donald Trump get elected in 2016 and then helped Joe Biden, projected to be elected in 2020, is a major defining feature of America. And the progressive left in this country has to understand that your attempts to belittle people, to call us all oppressors and racists, and people who believe the system should oppress people, are not doing yourself any favors by trying to alienate people you need to help you implement things that you want to do. This is not some grand, crazy political 4D chess. This is how people should interact at a basic civil level. And yet, these so-called progressives just want to demean people they disagree with, want to call them all monsters, and have every indication of as soon as they get power, they would throw out every single standard they were holding up to Donald Trump and us to get their agenda. You know, you would think that just winning would be enough, but it doesn't seem to be enough. It seems to be, unless it's a complete repudiation of everything they've ever disagreed with, it will never be enough for them. Not understanding that they're the ones that have been rejected. I can't tell you how many memes I've seen saying if Bernie Sanders was the nominee, this would have been in the bag and it would have been done. Because very clearly, right, if that had been the case, if Bernie Sanders was the nominee and the polling had showed the exact same, Donald Trump would have handily won and been reelected as our president. Bernie Sanders was defeated in the primary, and he didn't almost win in 2016 because of his idea, but he won because of the opposition to Hillary Clinton. And these progressive plans have been defeated. These progressive politicians have overstretched and overextended themselves, and instead of realizing that maybe they're just reaching too hard and should try to come up with some other, extension or olive branch, no, they lose because the system is rigged, and that white supremacy and patriarchy and systems of oppression and all of that jazz is the only reason that they're being denied the electoral victory and the policy successes that they should rightfully have, which you don't have a right to. You have a right to compete in an election, but you don't have a right to win it. Same to you, President Trump. Guys, come on. I am still optimistic about America. More so than I've ever been. Because it would appear that projected 67% of us came out to vote for the president. And would appear that a record number of them supported the candidate that I voted for, but also want to have perhaps more divided government, maybe wants more Republicans at the local level. And you know what? Divided government is good. Divided government forces compromise, and it can force gridlock, but that's where the public comes in to put pressure on them to get the things that they need done to be done. It is important to have checks and balances in our system, and it's important to understand that people are going to disagree with us. And that because they disagree with us, it is not in our interest to assume the worst of them because we don't happen to like the person that they are supporting. If your plan is to demonize them and call them selfish and act like they don't have any real legitimacy in any way, shape, or form, just you wait. Just you wait. Joe Biden's coalition is large, but it's also temporary. And while the Republican Party is going to have to figure out what it wants to do in the future, if it can survive without Donald Trump, and if it's entirely possible that there's enough demographic change that's going to prevent them from being successful in the future, they're going to have to come up with something. But if the Democratic Party and the progressive left don't understand that they're trying to overreach and divide, that their messages keep getting rejected by the American public at large, and instead of blaming the American public, should look inward as to what they can do to appeal to more people, they're never going to learn. And it seems like whatever that center-right coalition and center-left coalition, as well I should say, decide to do is going to be where this country is going to go. And until you realize that you're going to have to deal with people who will have fundamentally different worldviews than you, that you're able to come up with something. And we should be able to get through this together. Because we got through the last 4 years, we can get through the next 4. And you know what? For all my personal qualms with the president, for all my personal disagreements with Joe Biden, for my disdain for the Democratic Party and my concerns about the Republican Party, I am still optimistic about America. I am optimistic of our foreign policy becoming one where America leads. I'm optimistic of our economic policy providing less protectionism and more free trade, with an emphasis on helping those who have been affected by it. And also, what I think nobody should forget is that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and it is of the utmost importance that the next head of the executive branch take it seriously and do everything possible to help us get through this. And it's going to require working with Congress to pass legislation to get money and support and supplies out to those of us who are being affected, because it's not going away until we get a vaccine. COVID is going to be around, and it's going around the world, and it's going to be a problem, and we're going to have to deal with it. And that requires competence and our adults in government to get together and realize they have to implement policies. They have to actually go to work. The courts can't force them to get a vaccine any faster. The courts can't force them to give out stimulus to those who are hurting. And the courts can't force them to just change the direction of the virus. We're going to have to get through this together. And guess what? People voted differently than you, and that's okay. You're going to still have to go to work. You're still going to have to live with them, hang out with them, and socially distance, of course. But eventually, when we're not so divided and we're not so stuck in a pandemic, we're going to have to come back together and live as a civil society in the way that we're used to. And you know what? Maybe, just maybe, when this is all said and done, we can learn to take a few deep breaths, stop doom scrolling, spend a little more time outside, catch up with people we haven't talked to in a while, make sure we're checking in on our friends and our neighbors, looking after our health, being mindful, and maintain that great, positive American spirit, knowing that despite our challenges, the best is yet to come. It's been a wild ride, folks. And again, it's now 4:15. Currently no updates. Still in limbo. Probably going to be hours from now or days from now. We'll find out. I'm sure I'll have more to say about it in the future. But for right now, we're just going to have to wait. So thanks to all the listeners out there who've helped keep me going. Currently running on about 8 hours of sleep over 2 nights. So probably going to go take a nap. But I do hope that you take this opportunity to take a few deep breaths, let the process play out, and we'll get through this together. Take care until the next time.